Okay, what's going on, ladies and gents? Welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're going to be reacting to my second year architecture portfolio. We've got the second camera back. Hello. So you guys would have seen that I reacted to my first year architecture portfolio, and if you haven't checked that out yet, I'd highly recommend. I'm not sure if we designed this. This was just a fraud of a project. This wasn't our best project, to be honest. This was probably my worst project throughout university. Yeah, awful. These are some awful iteration. Thought of this idea and we just rolled with it, and that's pretty much what happened in first year. We dove into my first year architecture work. Some bits were interesting, some bits weren't too bad actually, but it was all right overall. But today we're gonna dive into my second year architecture portfolio, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. But before we dive into the video, can you please smash that thumbs up button and hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet already. And let's dive into it. So second year was broken down into 4 projects, and those projects were broken down into 2 portfolios. So portfolio 1 contains project number 1 and project number 2, and portfolio number 2 contains project number 3 and project number 4. So our second year work was presented as A1 panels, which we would then pin up on the wall, present to our peers, tutors, whatever, and then we would take those A1 panels into a portfolio, put them into portfolio sleeves, and essentially that would become our portfolio. So let's dive into it. Project number 1 was actually a group project. It was simply create a model of our site. And as you guys would know, if you're an architecture student, group projects can be a bit manic. They can be unbelievably successful and fun and exciting, but they can also be very stressful and very overcomplicated, and things can just go a bit wild with a group project, especially when it comes to making models. So as you can see here, we were putting together a site model. This took literally probably four weeks, I think. And this was a very, very expensive model. I actually remember it being super expensive. I think we spent probably like £100 across the 4 or 5 of us in the group to make this model. So as you can see, this is very, very cramped. I think in second year, I got into the habit of putting way too much information onto panels, and a lot of them became very, very overcrowded, just like not needed to be this much information. Anyway, this is project 1. This was a group project. Let's move on to the next kind of main project. So we were given a site following the model that we made. I chose a site on the site, and this was a site located in Birmingham. I think this is a task of how many times can I say site. So I think the brief was essentially to design 30 to 60 residential units, both apartments and housing, within the Living the Loop, within Port Loop in Birmingham. So this is just a visual brief understanding things that I wanted to include in my project. So sustainability, fitness, healthy living, peace, learning, giving, outdoors, etc. And then going into more detail and looking into more research, I wanted to move forward with the idea of creating this kind of health and well-being village. And this was my manifesto, looking into health and well-being and understanding the important things and the key things that I wanted to include within my design. So it says here, I aim to design a village where people can live to improve their health and well-being. So site analysis, as you can see here, I actually got a drone and I flew a drone and took a picture of the site. And I thought this would be really interesting, so you can see kind of like this visual of the site rather than using Google Maps or Google Earth, which obviously a lot of us use. Moving into precedent studies, as you can see here, this is a kind of big step up from my first year work. When precedent studies, we essentially just took pictures of a precedent study, put it on a panel and just said that we looked at this and we looked at that. However, going into second year and going into third year, I very much critically analysed them a lot more. I went into a lot more detail to understand the actual projects, understanding housing kind of proportions and the elevations of proportions, looking at how we could have street access to kind of shops and retail units with having apartments above, looking at the landscape design and the master plan, and understanding how I can incorporate water and grass and trees and all of these kind of social community spaces that encourage peace and well-being, and more landscape precedent studies, which were really important to the development of my design. And as you can see, I went into some detail with my precedent studies to understand how we could use a landscape that would encourage interaction, encourage community, and essentially looking at this kind of broadband of landscape to intertwine the housing and the apartment units and encourage people to interact essentially. Into the initial massing and design of the network essentially. So I wanted to create this network following that research, looking at initial massing, all of the usual stuff as an architecture student, floor plan development, looking at the elevation and proportions, and all that gibberish is not really too interesting here. Anyway, the final kind of design, the master plan. So as you can see here, this was kind of like the main road. And once again, you can kind of see this broad band of spaces. So these kind of intertwine, and this is the center over here with kind of like this center landscape place where there'd be a water feature and everything where people can kind of sit around and socialize. And then looking at the floor plans, the terrace houses, so there's master bedroom, blah blah blah. I'm not going to bore you with all of that as well. Internal visuals, so these weren't the best visuals. I must say, this was my first time using Revit, so this entire project was done using Revit in second year. And I attempted to use Enscape, I think, to generate these visuals. And as you can see, they're all right. They're not amazing. I'm not too interested in the kind of hyper-realistic visuals that a lot of people would generate at university or at work. And then this was just like this outdoor space with these kind of canopies, which basically shows that this would be an outdoor space to help improve health and well-being, where activities would be going on, where yoga, stretching, fitness classes, socializing, the whole lot. And that is pretty much the project. Communal spaces shown here, materiality, not really too much detail. And then this was the final model. As you can see, dreadful. You can see there the laser cutter's done me there with the dark edges. And this took me, I remember this took me hours to make. And yeah, that is portfolio numero 1. And portfolio number 2, I think this is when I kind of took my work up to the next level. I stepped up my game a little bit. I did a little bit more research. I was a little bit more critical with my work. So let's dive into it. Context, there's a lot in this one, so we'll try and fly through it as quickly as possible. So, designing for children. This was a project that me and Jacob put together. This was essentially a 4-week project where we had to design and rebuild a tree house for a nursery in Birmingham for children aged, I think it was 18 months to 4 years old or something like that. And essentially we had 4 weeks to design or redesign this tree house that was already existing at the nursery, and the winner of the project would essentially go on and build it. So me and Jacob were together, we lived together, so it made sense that we would do this together. And if you guys haven't seen it, I actually did a full documentary of the entire process of this project and actually putting it together and building it. So if you guys want to check that out, head over to, you might have to scroll down, or I'll link it down below in the description, actually, that might be easier. Anyway, visual brief. So the idea was basically having this very kind of simple but affordable design, because we felt that the only way we were going to win this competition, because it was essentially a live studio competition, the only way we were going to win it and the only way we were going to be able to build it was to create something that was fairly simple, but still very kind of useful and creative, but also very affordable, because obviously the university have a budget and we wanted to create something that was going to be fairly cheap to build, fairly easy to build, but also still bring some excitement to the children, because we don't want anything kind of boring. Anyway, the initial ideas we had were kind of climbing, shelter spaces, education, seating spaces, kind of dinosaurs, animals, introducing kind of colour, because children like colour. The site and the client, of course, you have to understand the client thoroughly, and we wanted to look into a lot of kind of children play areas and understand why they chose that or why they did that, or kind of the thinking behind a lot of the child's play areas. More precedent studies, looking at how we can introduce actual animals into the structure and the actual design of the treehouse. Moving into initial ideas, as you can see here, lots and lots of iterations, lots and lots of sketches, understanding how it would work and how it would come together, and the materials that we could use and the different little elements and the climbing features and the kind of like the floor plan, lots of things. And then I'll just go into the final thing. So the floor plan and safety, obviously safety was really important, especially when you're working with children. So the floor plan essentially is very simple. You just come up these steps here, and this is essentially these color kind of circles of their journey. And it's basically either encourages them to go down this slide or encourages them to go over to this blackboard kind of seating education area. And then they've got this climbing mesh where they can climb up or down. And then they've got this hide and seek element. So the facade of the treehouse would essentially act as like this hide and seek. Elevations here, you can see the steps going up and this kind of change in elevation and change in levels, which provides bits of hiding, bits of kind of peeking over or ducking down. And then actually underneath the design would be this kind of little crawl space that they can also hide under there. And then these are some visuals. We actually put this together in SketchUp, so that was actually quite interesting. Visuals here showing the steps going up, the crawl space, the slide, the kind of hide and seek elements, the materials, and the kid enjoying himself. Exploded axonometric in introducing construction cost and materials, and then the final model, and that was the hideout. So if you want to check out the video of us actually constructing this, make sure you go down below in the description. And project number 4, Memories of Tomorrow. This is quite a detailed project, so I'm going to try and go through it as briefly as humanly possible. The main thing about this project was that I wanted to design a space that was going to be kind of like this community and this health and wellbeing centre. Essentially, the epicenter was a community space where people from Edgbaston could come together, learn about health and wellbeing, and improve their well-beingness, their health. Site analysis. But the main thing for me was looking at the location of museums around Birmingham and looking at community spaces around Birmingham. And essentially there wasn't actually many around the Edgbaston area around my site. And so I wanted to delve into more looking at the health and well-being in Ladywood itself and understanding the population in Ladywood and whether they have access to these kinds of spaces and these community spaces. Lots more research looking into healthy living, looking into maintaining a healthy lifestyle. I think all of us architect students could maybe look into this a little bit. More design development using kind of foam board and spatial layouts to actually create the geometry of the building and what are the more important spaces and what needs to be overlooking the river and the reservoir and what needs to be more kind of focused on the entrance, and whether a kitchen space would be next to a cafe or whether a cafe would be next to a community space and those kinds of things, and basically just looking at the spatial layouts of the building. More development once again, and with the reservoir being next to that site, it actually had a big slope and a big step down into the water. So I was basically looking at how I could introduce my building into the site. More spatial layouts. Honestly, I did a lot of this stuff. And then the final design. So essentially this is a community space, like I've already mentioned. So as you come in, you'd have the cafe on the left-hand side, you'd have all your bits and bobs on the right side with the core and the toilets, etc. But then straight ahead, there's actually this kind of community / museum space, which kind of educates you on health and well-being, educates you on mental health, on physical well-being, on recipes, on eating healthy, all those kinds of things. So essentially there's this big brain in the middle, which would be this big thing that would educate you on mental well-being. There'd be bits on the floor which tell you about recipes. And then there's this bit here which actually looks into this community kitchen, which would basically educate you on recipes and cooking and those kinds of things. And all of the food used for the kitchen and for the cafe would actually be grown around the site, where people can grow their ingredients, use those ingredients to make food in the kitchen, educate people around them, and then also people coming to the cafe can eat those foods that have been grown by the people of the community. Roof plan, west elevation, north elevation. So as you can see here, the site was kind of quite sloped and there was these step up, so once again I wanted to use the slope to my advantage and blend my building. Exhibition collage, basically, so this was the exhibition space, the community, the museum space. So once again you can see this big brain here, which is this thing that I did in Photoshop. And then this was this big window looking into the kitchen space. Exterior visuals, perspective environmental sections, all of that good jazzy stuff. Recipe archive wall, so this would basically be full of books for recipes. These would be the growing spaces for the ingredient spots. More diagrams looking into structure, fire regulations, access, all those kinds of things, all that good jazz. Detail, which I'm not very good at detailing. And that was it. That was my second year work. As you can see, it was a lot more detailed than my first year work, as it should be. As you go into second year, you want it to be a lot more detailed, a lot more thorough. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, please smash that thumbs up button. That'd be much, much appreciated. And yeah, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you next time. Peace.